Hey guys, this is the third part of this recording on the Stanford Binet scales. We've gone through the kind of the idea of what intelligence is. Then we covered kind of the old school Stanford Binet. Now I'm going to talk about the fourth version, the fourth edition, which is not the most current edition. The current edition is the fifth one, and I'll cover that in the next chunk of slides. But the book covers the fourth edition because that is the most current in Anastasi's universe. And there are some differences, and I'll talk about those. The fourth version, it expands upon the verbal kind of focus of earlier editions to incorporate some more quantitative and spatial and short-term memory tests. So it tries to broaden it, and so it's a big change from 3 and previously, which is another reason to cover it. But yeah, and also so that you at least have some continuity with the book for those of you that have it or have found it anyway. So yeah, I'm gonna kind of see how far I get with this. My power has been not so great, but I'm now recording on a laptop, although I guess I was before, but this laptop has sufficient power, so if power goes out, I should be good. Yeah, so let's get started. Cool. So the modern scale, the fourth and fifth editions really revised it. So they dramatically revised the questions and also changed it to be a hierarchical structure. Now it's not dependent upon the unitary intelligence, like that general factor. Now it's more theory linked with crystallized and fluid intelligence. I mistyped here, so it's not exactly multiple intelligence like Howard Gardner. It's more Thurstone's model, which is that multidimensional, that intelligence is made of like 3 primary abilities. Those are spatial, quantitative, and verbal, and those in turn kind of drive into like are driven by G. But the basic idea is still there. So disregard the Howard Gardner version of multiple intelligence. There's a general factor and it's hierarchical, not like independent. Cool. Yeah, so here's what the hierarchy looks like for the fourth edition. It's general intelligence, and so that's G, and then subset under that, so you can kind of envision this on its side, kind of like an octopus with 4 legs, which is not an octopus. So that's like so general intelligence is the overall factor. Yeah, so this guy first, and then it's kind of, well, like these 4 chunks are related, but not like super linked, but they all link back to general ability. And you'll notice here that it's much more balanced as opposed to just verbal reasoning. So the like routine subsets, subtests are used for adaptive testing. So it's the 1986 version uses test knowledge of like words and their meaning. Kind of, and the highest level you score on the vocab test kind of indicates the starting point for the rest of the tests. So it's kind of adaptive in the sense that they'll kind of move up your difficulty level or down your difficulty level based on your verbal ability. And so this is used to kind of gauge your general age group. And it's found in general that verbal ability, so vocabulary, is really heavily linked to G. Its correlation is really high. And so in the 5th edition, so that's the 2003 version, they added some additional nonverbal to allow kind of those that are more, that have kind of like a less balanced profile. So those that are, high on quantitative but moderate on verbal, they get a higher kind of starting like set point because of that quantitative score. So it allows multiple kind of aspects to tap in. So yeah, the routing subtests are used for adaptive. So once an age range is established using those subtests, this allows you to choose that starting point. It's called like the basal level. So this is the level and so like that starting point leads to you figuring out the basal and ceiling. And so the basal is the level at which a minimum number of correct responses is obtained, and the ceiling is the number of whatever your number of incorrect responses is that indicates that an item is too difficult. So basal is like you definitely got that like that area, and ceiling is where you're definitely not at that level. So you're somewhere in between basal and ceiling. And the goal of a good test is to keep that area really narrow. So there are 15 subtests. They're pretty nested. I encourage you to check. A lot of these are like visualized on YouTube. So like there's bead memory, which kind of are these cool like single and double like bead displays for young kids. They're sequentialist like displays for older kids and adults, and it's used to test visual short-term memory. You've got a quantitative piece where items are presented visually and subject responds verbally. Scrap papers permitted. These are used to test quantitative skills, or mathematical at the very least. Next, we've got memory for sentences. This tests auditory short-term memory. Sentences are presented verbally and must be repeated verbally. So it's just, can you recall it? Next is pattern analysis, and this tests visual, spatial, and motor skills. So you're presented with arrays of blocks. And the blocks have to be assembled by hand into to match the pattern. Now, if you have any kind of like motor disability, this can be a tough one, even if you have the visual spatial aspect. So, so test it, like givers have to kind of be mindful of this. And so this is if you aren't like if you don't have a developmental disability, this one is pretty good, but it's tapping into both motor and visual. All right. So comprehension. So this is not a test of reading comprehension, but a test of social and moral reasoning. So items are presented verbally, and they have to be answered verbally. Now, I realize it feels like I'm just going through a list, and I am, because I want to give you a sense of how many tests there are. I encourage you to check some out. Absurdities is pretty fun. So another test is social and logical reasoning. Items are presented visually. They must be answered verbally. And so this test tries to allow like both verbal and visual, like it's really trying to cover a broad spectrum of kind of ability. That's why there's 15 subtests. So we've got memory for digits, and this has got 2 subtests in it. But both scores are combined, so you've got digit forward and digit backward, and that's just recalling. So you're given a string of digits, you're asked to recall them in the exact same order. That's digit forward, but you're also asked to recall them backwards, so in the opposite order. And that taps both short-term auditory memory and active working memory. And backwards is way harder because you have to like flip. I at least find it harder. And the subtest taps both those pieces. Next, we have copying, and so this is for like there's 2 levels of it. So for young kids, it's using blocks. Older kids, it's paper and pencil. And this tests visual motor integration with visual spatial skills. Next, memory for objects, and that's just testing sequential visual short-term memory. It's like just identifying the objects. Next is matrices. This is my favorite one. It tests nonverbal logical deductive reasoning, Raven's matrices. Unfortunately, those are in my office, but they're really cool. I again encourage you to check them out. So yeah, number series tests quantitative and logical deductive reasoning. Scratch paper is allowed for this one. Next, you got paper folding and cutting. So no actual cutting occurs on the actual test items. It's only for the sample items, but it tests visual spatial reasoning. Next, we've got verbal relations, which tests, shockingly, verbal logical reasoning, and yeah. Okay, next slide. So, equation building tests quantitative, logical, deductive reasoning skills, and active working memory. How do we combine these? So items of the subtests are administered to obtain both basal, so like the minimum, like that you definitely are proficient at, and ceiling measures. So the highest number of items administered minus the number of failed items is your raw score. And this raw score is converted into a standard age score, which is a mean of 50 and a standard deviation of 8. And then these subtests are then combined to produce area scores. And so out of those 15 subtests, there are 4 scales. You've got verbal reasoning, and so that's vocab, comprehension, absurdities, and verbal relations. You've got abstract / visual spatial reasoning. This is pattern analysis, copying, matrices, paper folding, and cutting. Next, we've got quantitative reasoning. This one's a little smaller. It's quantitative number series and equation building. And last, you got short-term memory, which is that bead memory task, memory for sentences, memory for digits, and memory for objects. And also in the short-term memory one, the 2 subtests for both forward and backwards are lumped into the memory for digits. So these 4 scales produce their own area score, and the 4 area scores are combined to produce a test composite. And this has a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 16. And it's based on modern theories of intelligence. It tests a wide range of kind of content areas, and it has aspects of the crystallized and fluid intelligence. And see, it allows you to test for a wide range of ages, as young as 2, as old as adulthood. So the cutesy joke is like ages 2 to 200 or something. It's got really strong reliability. We're talking like 0.97 is great. There's one reason why a lot of people love doing research on intelligence, because it is really reliable. Now, these tests took a long time to develop. They're really solid in terms of validity as well. You'll have noticed that there are like 20-year gaps. That's because they take that whole entire time to like build upon the previous version of the test to make a better test that incorporated all the previous knowledge. And this version tests short-term memory explicitly rather than just kind of having it implicitly built in. It's awesome. It does have some shortcomings. It eliminated the age scale for a point scale. It is burdensome. Now, it's a cumbersome test. It's 15 things. So it taps a ton of areas. It does require that the tester to be facile at all 15 of those different specific tests. I mean, it doesn't require the tester to obtain basal and ceiling measures for all 15 tests, but kinda does. There are possible ethnic and socioeconomic biases, just mere exposure. There's a lot. There are differences here. Also, like, it's a costly test because you have to have a person there to administer. You can't just like do pencil and paper. There are older norms than like other child-based tests. So like so it's the 1986 version. So those test norms are a bit old compared to other tests, which tend to be updated a little more regularly, but in more minor incremental ways.